unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
Art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Welcome to another episode of the Art Pod. My guest today is Lauren Ruiz for part 2. Part 1 was about her employment history while also being an artist. And then part 2 will be about her practice as an artist. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be back on the Art Pod.
Of course. So I'll just begin a little bit by reading a little bit about your work, and then we'll jump right into it. So Lauren is a research-based multimedia artist interrogating perceptions of nature, the role of institutional authority, and their complex intersections with class, labor, and identity. She creates speculative fiction-based installations, digital works, and multimedia sculptures questioning the relationship between the human body and the post-natural environment. Ruiz draws upon environmental data in science journals, climate fiction novels, and horror films. Her interactive installations situate viewers in recognizable institutional spaces, affecting how they relate to the complex mechanisms of evolution, ecology, data, and embodiment. Ruiz's research projects have been presented at the Latvian National Museum of Art, the University of Applied Arts Vienna, UC Santa Barbara, UC Berkeley, the 2021 College Art Association Conference, and the 2022 AAH Conference. Her work has been exhibited in the United States, Japan, Canada, the Czech Republic, and Cuba. Ruiz has been a resident artist at the Vermont Studio Center, the Guerrilla Sciences Art Sci residency, the iPark Foundation Artist in Residence program, and the 2022 Santa Fe Art Institute Revolution residency. She is a represented artist at Marquee Projects in Bellport, New York. That is a lot to cover.
Yeah, I was going to say, dang, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, so let's get started. I think I want to really begin with how your journey began. So once you've graduated from college, and I really I recommend everyone listen to part 1 of this interview so you kind of get a sense of what Lauren studied in school and how that experience was for her. But after graduating from your, what was it, MFA? I think that was the last high degree that you had.
MFA in 2019.
Yeah. How you began to really think about the evolution of your art and how you really started thinking about themes that you want to explore in your art.
Yeah. That's a great question. From 2019. I think that the first thing that was an issue moving from an MFA program, having a studio space, was the scale of my work. I had to adjust. We're in Brooklyn. Adjust how I made work, the scale of the work, obviously, based on the spatial constraints that I had.
Did you always want to make large scale installations, or were you starting your work kind of small and then seeing how it progresses?
Yeah. When I started the MFA program, I was making smaller sculptures because I think that's what I was used to, like not having a studio space. So you just make smaller works. And so my work essentially grew to accommodate the space I was in.
Okay.
It's like if you have a goldfish.
Yeah.
And it could just like grow to the space. I think that's what happened with the works I was making. So when I went from my first studio at Stony Brook to my second studio, that was the studio I was in for the last 2 years, the second studio was huge.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I have all this space. So now I can just make bigger things.
Yeah. What am I going to do with it?
That's really when I started making more large scale installation. After I graduated, I started making more digital work and small scale sculpture. A lot of videos. That's basically September of 2019, I started doing more waxworm videos.
Okay.
Because I had kind of followed this thread through thinking through plastic pollution, and that was a big theme in my work, in my MFA program. But then coming from that, I was thinking about how these synthetics become a part of the environment. How do we deal with them? All of this good stuff. And I found out that waxworms can digest polyethylene, which I think is fascinating.
Interesting.
And so I started looking at non-humans. And this was like the first time I was like, oh, I'm thinking about non-human life worlds, or like how they experience the world, and non-human labor. And like, does that make sense? Is it like, what are the ethics of non-human labor if it's not like consensual or like agreed upon? Because scientists were thinking, oh, we can use waxworms to like solve this problem. So that was, I guess that was the thread that led from these large scale works that I was doing at Stony Brook into my practice out, in the world as an artist. And then, so I was doing those, and then the pandemic happened, obviously. And
So what was your first major kind of exhibition out of school?
first major exhibition out of school, well, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting about a show that I did in 2019.
Yeah.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
what I want to bring you back to.
It was a long time ago.
That's why we're
Wow,
here, to recall
yeah,
these memories.
That's crazy. So I had a 2-person show in
Yes.
fall of 2019. Sorry, I've been busy.
You have, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, I had a 2-person show at LI MoCA,
Okay.
Long Island Museum of Contemporary Art, out on Long Island in Patchogue. The show was called Science Faction, and I did do a large-scale installation for that one. That was done with some recycled works. It was essentially a different iteration of a work I had done previously. So some of the components were from other works, which I think is important if you are thinking environmentally or sustainably, to like, how can I use pieces of work or like materials from past projects and incorporate them into new works, if you're thinking about sustainability and if you care about things like that in the environment in your work. Anyway, so a lot of that work was, it came from a previous iteration, and there was a new structure that was built for the center. So there was this like large black, like, it wasn't a semicircle, it was a little bit bigger than a semicircle, but this kind of very tall shelf thing that was in the center of the space, and that was all made at my dad's shop, which is great because there's always like space somewhere that I can use. So I did that there, and then the rest of the work I did in my basement. Like I made works in the basement. It's just like a normal, like unfinished basement, and made the work there. So that was the last large scale installation.
So when you
that I
approach
had
shows
done.
like that, how do you really does the space that you're going to show inform the work that you do for it, or do you think about the work separately from the space it's going to show in?
Yeah. So in that case, I wasn't really considering the space because the curator had asked for like, oh, we want an iteration of this thing you just did for your thesis. Can you make that work for the space? So the space does come into consideration to some extent, but for that show, it definitely wasn't site responsive. It wasn't me thinking, how can I work with this particular site or the architecture of this room or any of that. It was really just about like the work in a space. So I was treating it definitely more like, like a traditional like gallery space, where I wasn't really thinking about place or space. It was just, oh, this is like part 2 or 2.0 of this installation that I had done previously. But in more recent works, I have been thinking a lot more about site specificity and how like how to work based on location and how that the place itself informs the work.
Okay. So you mentioned that you worked with the curator for that show. What, like, did you sit down with the curator and talk about like the larger theme that they wanted? Was this like just entirely your idea? Like, what was the work also? What were the themes?
So the show was called Science Faction, and the curator was interested in how artists are thinking about truth and belief and validity within like science and art. This like play between fact and fiction, and how artists are thinking more broadly about climate and ecological issues. So that was essentially the theme. And he had already had ideas about the type of work that he wanted from me to show. So there are some situations where curators will see your work and be like, oh, we really like what you've done here, and then kind of give you free reign. For this instance, the curator was like, oh, I really like what you did here. Is there any way we could have something similar to this for this show? So although there was definitely wiggle room in like what I wanted to produce and how I wanted to respond to this theme, there was direction based on like the aesthetic needs of the show, like what he was interested in showing of mine with the other artist, Brendan Bellingy, who was the other artist in the show. Like he had all photographs, and he might have had some drawings, I don't remember, but they were all essentially wall, like 2D wall works. So
Whereas
for
yours
me-
was 3D and sculptural.
Yeah, so for me, the curator wanted sculpture, that's also something like with curation, like how do you want to balance the space? So, yeah.
Okay, great. So after that show, did you go on to do another show? Did you do residencies?
Excuse me, sorry. So from there, what did I do?
That was in 2019.
That was 2019.
Then the pandemic hit, and I
Then the
know you
pandemic
worked
happened.
at the parish.
Yes. So the pandemic happened started 2020, and I was just doing these really bizarre painted Q-tip works because I think I was trying to. I remember watching Andrew Cuomo every day, 11:30. Watched him every day, and I was just trying to figure out how I could even wrap my brain around these numbers that were coming in of people who were getting sick, and like how they were performing these tests with these like swabs and whatnot. So I actually kind of grabbed like this little like pocket or seed from the back of my head from when I was Takashi Murakami's assistant, and I was like, I'm just gonna mix as many different colors of paint as I can for each individual swab and treat it like it's this like individual thing. So no swab got the same color. Everything was a little bit different, but it helped me somehow process the amount of people that were getting sick. It was like, I don't know. It was definitely more of a like data visualization kind of thing where I was making, I think I stopped at like 2,000 or something. I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's already
So
a lot.
I did like 2,000 individually like painted swabs, and they were all like color coded and pretty and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. Is this for something? Is this just like busy work? It was just essentially part of my practice and part of my process, and that's something that I guess I do return to periodically, where I'm just doing like drawing or just sculpting or just like this project, for instance, as part of my practice, but the works themselves are never like for anything.
Right.
It's just like, it's just like working. I'm just working. I'm just doing the thing. It's not like, oh, this is for a show or this is for whatever. It's just part of your practice and you're just doing it. So that was 2020. I had a bunch of like online exhibitions. Like everyone was doing online exhibitions.
That was all of
That was
COVID.
what we were doing in
Yeah.
2020. some outdoor shows. I think I did a projection exhibition also at LA Mocha. But a lot of 2020 was just like online exhibitions, which was also good because I had all this digital work too that I could show in these like very specifically made for digital spaces. So that was nice. So then I started working at the parish, but the next exhibition that I think was noteworthy was the show that I did for Southampton Arts Center in 2021. I'm like, fill me in if I'm missing anything.
No, I will, but
remember.
no, that was a big group show.
Yeah. So, funny enough, I was actually asked to do that show in February of 2020. And so I was like gearing up for this show. The show was called Artists as Activists. And so I was going to do something with earthworms because I had already started doing things about like earthworms and sounds and all this stuff. COVID happened. I kind of got derailed from that project, started doing these other things, and then got the word that the show was actually going to happen in person in 2021. And so, that happened in 2021. And that wasn't necessarily, I'm trying to think if that counts as like site specific, because the space itself did inform the scale of the work, obviously. Right. And the Southampton Arts Center has like these different rooms that are going, they're all like in a row.
Right.
So the room that I was in the center had, 2 doors at either end.
Right.
So that people could just like walk through the space.
But your sculpture was dead in the center,
Exactly.
so you had to walk around it regardless.
So I was like, okay, well, you can't walk through my work.
Yeah.
I like the idea of directing people and like controlling their movement in spaces. Mm-hmm. So I put this giant
obstacle,
yes, that you had to essentially like confront with your body and then figure out how to get around it right dead center in the space. So I had this giant, I think it was 12 feet, 8 feet. It was 8 feet tall. And then 12 by 12, essentially, like it was like an organic shape, like cord earthwork shape in the space.
But the grass on top was
grass on
real.
Top. Yes.
Yeah.
So I had sod on top, and then I had a sound component.
That was my favorite part of the work. Was the sound.
That was my favorite part too.
Yeah, it was incredible.
It was the first time I ever did anything with sound. So I had a like 5.1 whatever. I'm not that techie with sound yet. I'm still learning. Everybody.
I mean, don't talk to me about sound because this podcast has been a learning curve.
Yeah, but with that also, I was able to work with one of the PhDs in music at Stony Brook who came and like helped me set up the mixer, and like he knew what speakers to use for what I needed it to be. Mm-hmm. So that was a nice experience of like having that type of tech assistance on site. But yeah, so the sound component was taken from recorded earthworm sounds because I wanted the viewer to kind of have this experience of being underground, and sound and vibration, like sound is tactile, right? It's physical. Yeah. So I wanted to do something with like creating density in the air with the sound so that you could feel, I just wanted to like, I wanted you to feel what it was like to be underground to the best of my ability. Mm-hmm. Given the fact that we are human beings, we walk through air, we see, we have ears, we have bones. We're not earthworms, obviously. Yeah. But there was something about trying to convey this experience of being like this underground, unseen laborer.
What I love, and you use this in one of your talks, was I think you called it silent labor.
Invisible
labor?
Labor?
Sorry, invisible labor.
Yeah.
I loved when you used that.
Yeah. Well, because it is. And you can think about invisible labor.
Yeah, but to me, it had larger themes of relating it then to like women, domestic work, professional work. Like, yeah.
Or even if I'm thinking about where that work was located, I was also thinking about migration and invisible labor.
Yep.
So this work was in Southampton, New York. And yeah, like the labor force and like how visible or invisible they are was a part of the work, because I also think about race, immigration, migration.
Which is really interesting in the area that you live in.
Yeah.
And out in Long Island, because
Yeah.
that I feel
Oh,
like has
definitely.
an interesting history behind not only obviously the indigenous people who live there, but then obviously migration and immigration.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's it's a really complicated and complex system that I essentially was talking about through thinking about like the earthworm as a symbol. So yeah, I really enjoyed that work, and that led me not only to really think about immersive installation in a different way, because usually it's like, oh, you need 17 different components for this to be effective. And I only had 2. I had the sculpture in the center and I had the sound. And it was my first time trying to like pare back and like distill to like what
Edit.
yeah. Edit it down to like what are the bare bones of like what this needs to be, and like no extra fluff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sound was my favorite part of
Mine
that.
too.
And it was, like I said, my first time doing anything with like sound. And I'm still like, I wouldn't say dabbling, playing, experimenting with sound, because I've used sound since. But that was the first time where I was like, oh, there's something to this.
So how did you come upon the idea of using these earthworms? How did you get them? How did you make the sound? Because I feel like this is the tidbit that listeners want to know. Fun fact.
Yeah, this is what people did a lot of weird things during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I wasn't excluded from that. I had a little worm farm in my basement, like, what? Sue me. So I bought them on Amazon.
Okay. You bought the worms on Amazon?
Yes, I bought them on Amazon.
Okay. I didn't even. Amazon literally just has everything now.
I know. And it's funny because people are like, oh, you could just get them, in your yard or whatever. But
weren't you looking for specific ones or like a specific species, or they were native to Long Island?
no, that's the other. Well, that might be it. That's actually a very
Okay.
important part. The earthworms that I use are non-native to North America.
Okay.
So they came over with like the first wave of European settlers and then just like infiltrated the ground and wiped out all the other earthworms that were here.
Wow. Just honestly,
And-
colonization right there.
Hello, yes. So this is like the meat for me, the meat and potatoes, if you will.
Yeah.
Where I just like love that no one thinks about earthworms as being an invasive species, which they were an invasive species. But like with anything that's moving from one place to another, the terms non-native and invasive they're not interchangeable, but it really depends on like who is being affected.
I mean, I don't know. Just thinking about gentrifying neighborhoods, literally those two words are like popping into my head.
And like if
Invasive and non-native.
and so because these earthworms weren't like hurting anyone, and like who is the anyone we're talking about?
Right.
They're just non-native. They're good. They're great. They're good for crops and agriculture, and they help us, whoever us is. So it's
But obviously, before those earthworms even got there, the ones who were native were obviously already doing
they
a
were already-
role.
Yeah, but they were smaller.
Okay.
And so these like monstrous earthworms came over, which they're not even that big, but they came over and just essentially re-engineered the land to suit European crops. Like without even, like, isn't that wacky?
Yeah, because North America already had indigenous crops.
They had crops. Things were happening.
Yeah.
But by bringing these like potted plants over on their ships, they were bringing these little like ecological engineers that were then going to go into the soil and over time like repopulate and like change things around so that when these European crops were planted, everything was all well and good.
I mean, these colonizers literally rooted themselves
Yes.
in this world.
Gosh, we could have a whole conversation about
I love it.
rootedness. Yeah. So I love how excited I get about worms.
No, I'm fine. This is like the perfect analogy, so I love talking about this.
Crap. But yeah, so a lot of this wasn't when I got the earthworms
On Amazon.
on Amazon, I don't think I was thinking about all of this yet, because it's always like in hindsight where you're like, oh my God, this totally makes sense. This is what I'm doing. And then you can talk about it and everyone thinks just like, oh my gosh, this was all like thought through. It wasn't. I was just interested in, I don't remember how I got to the earthworms. Oh, I got to the earthworms the same way I got to the waxworms, which was thinking about micro and nanoplastics in soil. And I found this like one like fact, this like little, tidbit, if you will, of information that was like, earthworms body weight is decreasing by like 6% each year because they are ingesting like synthetic materials. They don't, thinking it's food.
What does that say about humans?
And
We
they're
ingest
not-
microplastics on a daily basis. Okay, I won't even
That's
touch
going
that
back
topic
in
then.
time because
Okay.
that's the work I was doing in my MFA,
Right.
thinking about micro and nanoplastics in the body. And I talked to a professor of bioengineering on campus, and she was like, "Yeah, these like synthetic toxicants are getting stuck in people's lymph nodes."
100%.
And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do with this?" But that's like a whole nother
Right. No, these are huge topics.
gosh. What were we talking about?
How you went from how you came to the earthworms
Oh,
because they
Yes,
were
yes.
with the microplastics.
sorry. Yes. So it just, both of those things, like with anyone's practice, I'm sure, it's like you're just like following breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
And one thing leads to the next, and you don't know where it's going to lead you, but you just need to just like trust, be like, okay, this might not be what I thought I was going to be doing, but I'm ordering worms on Amazon.
And here I am. They're living in my
And
basement.
They're living in my basement, and I have some like contact mics and headphones, and I was just burying the microphones in the soil.
Yeah.
And I was just
experimenting.
standing there with the headphones on, listening to the earthworms.
What was your first reaction when you heard that sound for the first time?
I think I felt really, they felt like, it felt like it gave them agency in a way where I was like, oh my gosh, they're like actually, it feels stupid to say, but like, oh, they're actually like living beings.
Yes, because we don't see them.
Yeah.
The
But
only thing
also-
that confirms they're alive under there is that sound at this point.
Yeah. But we don't hear the sound.
No.
But the amount of sound, the amount of movement that happens like in the ground, like we don't think about that, but there's transformation under the ground all the time. Everyone's moving around, moving,
Yeah.
grooving, but we don't think about it because it's just like this unseen thing. And like anything that isn't seen isn't really considered.
Yes.
So, so I felt I had like a weird relationship with these earthworms during COVID in my basement. And also, like I was underground
Yeah. In the basement.
in the basement. Yeah, it's just like this weird,
Subterranean life.
totally. And like now, we won't go here right now. We'll get to it later. But like, cut to like 4 years later, all of my work is about subterranean and interior spaces. So the worms, as like kooky as it was, like that was a major point for me.
Yeah.
Of like thinking about them as these like what I just wanted to know more, and then I just read a bunch of books about earthworms, which there aren't as many as you'd think.
I didn't think there was any, honestly.
Yeah, there are a few, but most of them are they're framed within like agriculture.
Of course, because that's their purpose.
Their purpose, right? Like that's what makes them valuable.
Yeah.
Like they're not just valuable on their own. They're valuable because they're good for like production for human need.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
Humans literally obliterate anything that's not useful to them,
Yeah.
as is
yeah.
clear.
So
Okay, so now so that's how you came about doing the audio for that work.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So then what was the next step after that group exhibition at the Southampton Art Institute? Is it Art Institute, Art Center?
Southampton Arts Center.
Art
yes.
Center, okay.
That was 2021. All throughout the pandemic, I was applying for residencies.
Were there any residencies that were very informative to your practice?
When I I mean, the Santa Fe Art Institute.
Yeah, I know you've
Definitely.
Yeah, so let's touch on that.
Yeah. I
because
feel
know
like the
was
ones that I
important.
had done in between were great. But there are different structures to residencies that are like really great for some artists and really not as beneficial for others. I'm not the type of artist who, with like some of the residencies I've done, it's like you get a studio space, like we feed you, and you get to just like be in the studio making all the time. Sounds great to a lot of people I know. It sounded great to me, but going to some of these, it's just not my style. Like I'm not someone who wants to be in my studio making all the time. So that's why the Santa Fe Art Institute was great, because most of the artists that were there at the time I was there, I mean, everyone's just more like research and like conceptually driven. So there were just like a lot more conversations happening than making. Like a few people were like making things great, but a lot of people were like going for drives and like reading and like hanging out and talking about things, or like sitting outside and like watching the birds.
And I think it was helpful, right? Because in this residency, you don't have to produce an artwork.
Yeah. I mean, most of the residencies, I've never gone to a residency that says you need to make something for us, because I'm not that type of artist, and that pressure would kill me. Like, no, I can't do it. No, the residencies I've gone to are like, do what you want with the time that you're here. But I did need to propose, like, this is what I will be doing while I'm there.
Yeah.
So when it came to the Santa Fe Art Institute, I applied in 2020. So by the time I went in 2022, I'd already done all the work
That you wanted
that I
to do.
said I was
Yeah.
going to do, or some iteration of.
Right, because at that point, right, residencies were like kind of had that year where they had off, so everything was kind of pushed back.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what happened to me. I was supposed to go in 2021.
Yeah.
And then so they pushed it to 2022. And when I was there, I spent a lot of time
Hanging out in the
outside.
desert.
Yes. Let me back up for a second, because I think it's important to note that summer, so I went in September, but that summer I was asked to do 2 solo shows the following year. And so when I was in Santa Fe, I was doing a lot of research, thinking through the work that I was going to make for these upcoming shows.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I was there just like dilly-dallying.
Hanging out in the desert in the sand.
A little bit. But I was like really trying to push, like, what am I going to do for these 2 shows that I have coming up? Because like, who gets 2 shows in 1 year at the same, like, be asked to be in 2 shows in the same month? Like June of 2022, I was asked to be represented by Marquee Projects, and I would have a show in March of 2023. And then I was asked by Matt Ward, who was the curator at Museum of the Southwest, to do a site-responsive installation for the museum that would open. Oh, when did that open? June
Last year.
of 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm throwing a lot of dates out there, but
I'm glad you remember that. I am horrible with dates.
well, you remembered shows that I didn't remember doing, so
Just one.
we're even.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I was in Santa Fe, I spent a lot of time driving around and like beating myself over the head. Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And the driving wasn't like, oh, this is my practice. Like, I didn't realize that it was important to me yet to be able to just like go and be out in spaces. I was still struggling with like, oh, I have to be making things. So the first half of that residency, I was waking up at 6 a.m. I was in the studio by 7 a.m. I was like working all day on these like ridiculous little like nothingness sculptures, because I was trying to figure out like what I was going to do for these shows. And the second half, I just kind of gave up. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I just did a lot of driving and a lot of writing. And by writing, I mean like, what am I going to do?
Okay, fair.
I wasn't like writing anything. Like,
Yeah.
I was just trying to like note take and read notes just to try and figure out what's going on in my brain. So like maybe there's something I can like cling on to. And I remember we had a crit session the last week of my residency, and I was so in my head about everything I was going to be doing, and I had written down like keywords on papers with like a big marker and like tape. I taped like 30 words up on the wall behind me, like a crime scene. I was
my
like,
God.
this is where I'm at, guys. Help me. And I got some really good feedback from my, the fellow residents and one of the people who worked there at the time. And that then led me to like the work that I would actually produce. So yeah, sometimes just like having conversations about like all the mess that's going on in your brain, or for me, the mess that's going on in my brain leads me to be like, oh, you're like, I can like give you something, and then you're filtering it back to me, and now I understand what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like what I should be focusing on.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, one of the other artists was like, you have all these words, but they're all connected. Pick one word. Pick one. They're all embedded
Were you
in
just listing synonyms of the same word?
No. It
Like
was
opening up a thesaurus, like
no,
what's
no, it was like violence, underground, Christianity, body, desert, oil.
those are very heavy
I
words.
don't freaking remember, but like it was just like thinking through like I was focusing on the Llano Estacado, and
Yeah.
this was for the show for Texas, because I was treating it as one body of work. Like everything that I'm doing is about this place, whether it's going to be in Texas or whether it's going to be in Bellport at Marquee, because I can't compartmentalize. This is my practice. I'm just going to focus on this place and my response to this place.
And before that show, I know you went before to kind of get acquainted with the area and the land and its history.
Yeah. So right after I got back from Santa Fe, I had 2 weeks, and then I went to Texas. But Santa Fe, it's on like the western border of the Llano Estacado. So that space still kind of counts as this like larger region. But yeah, so one artist was like, pick one word. One artist was like, I was saying something about like, oh, I'm just like really in my head. And he was like, you don't live in your head, you live in your body.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Interesting, because I feel like I live in my head.
oh, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Which was good, because I was like, okay, if I'm experiencing a place, I'm experiencing it. Like I'm mediating the place. Like I'm seeing it through like my eyes with my shitty vision,
You're feeling it in your body,
and like
hearing
my
it.
ears,
Yeah.
and like my skin, and my, like it's,
Extremities.
yeah, and like my like sensorial perception of a space.
Yeah.
So it's not just like this idea of a place up like in your head. It's like I'm in it. Like you need to embody, like or be in your body to think about how like your embodied experience of a place.
Right.
So those were two insights that were really helpful. And then the person that worked there, she was like, just in passing, like after the crit was done, we were like leaving, and she goes, oh, have you been to Carlsbad Caverns? And I'm like, no. And she's like, oh, I think you should probably go there. And that just like in passing, like totally changed the work. There are like so many like little like, it feels like a pinball machine.
Isn't it crazy how like sometimes life gives you a push?
Yeah.
Like in the direction you're supposed to be going without
Yeah.
like just very discreetly, just like little things.
Yeah, and like you can leave them and be like, okay, great, cool.
Exactly.
And then, you just take what take what applies, and you leave the rest.
Yeah.
So that led me to like really think about underground spaces, particularly in this region of West Texas or Eastern New Mexico, which also connected to the worms, right?
Right.
So like it wasn't a far off thing, for me to be thinking about the underground place, but I needed that push
Right.
from outside to be like, oh, this is where you should start. And like, it gave me some just like organization about like how I would be researching the place, because I did have a year, like I had an entire year to plan, to research, and to produce work for the Museum of the Southwest, and I was given a residency there as well. So, Matt Ward, curator. Shout out to Matt, wonderful.
I hope he's listening to this.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. But anyway, he offered me a residency. So I was the first artist in residence at the Museum of the Southwest, which was amazing. I was able to like stay in this little house on the museum's campus and just kind of explore Midland, Texas. And it was so like, I don't know. I had never been to Texas before. And Texas is one thing, but Midland, Texas is another. It's just so foreign to me. It was foreign. But I had that time because I was this, artist in residence to go and like just be in the place for a few weeks at a time. And I went 3 times. I couldn't do like a long extended stay because I had to work, obviously, but I had these like little blips of time where I could go and just like drive around and be in this place and like think about the land, the landscape, like communities' relationships to land, like what the culture is there and what their like economic systems are. And obviously I was only there, like, yes, I was there quite a bit and I had a year to think about this, but I didn't live there. Like, I'm not from there. So I wanted to make sure I was being careful about how I was approaching topics. And like, I love a good critique, but I wanted to make sure I was critiquing systems and not people, because I was like, hello, I'm thinking about underground spaces in Texas.
Right.
I'm obviously going to think about oil.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't just like, oh, oil's bad. Like, what else is there? Like, what else can we get at to actually like move people to think about things in a different way, instead of just like coming at them with something that's going to make them be like, oh, and then like turn away and ignore the work. Like, how do I get people to engage and think about this in a different way that might be effective? Please redirect me if I'm like
no. This is great, because like this is actually continuing in the direction that I want to, because the next thing that I was going to ask you is like what the exhibition Sheol was like at the museum, and what the overarching themes were, and how you staying in Midland, Texas to reinforce that work. Yeah.
So again, I went to Midland super excited and like feeling the pressure, right? Because I had never been asked to do a site-specific work before. I had never been given a solo museum show before. And I was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Yeah, I was like, I'm Diana Ross. I don't give a shit. This is fucking sick. And like after that like high wore off, I was like, oh my God, this is such a huge responsibility. I better not mess this up. So when I was there, I was like reading a lot about Texas and like going to this museum. I went to the Petroleum Museum.
Which is strange that there is such a museum out there.
Let me tell you, the exhibition design, phenomenal.
Wow.
Like I forgot how many millions of dollars of like a budget went into the exhibition design for the Petroleum Museum. If anyone goes to Texas, go to the Petroleum Museum. It's wacky. It's just wacky. And so I went there twice and spent like hours there because I needed to get like a sense of like this mythos of like American oil and like this like connection,
which sustains the economy in Texas.
And like
and America.
Yeah. So like it's this economic value, but it was also like very it felt very like religious too, where it was like,
well, religion is so embedded in Texas in life.
Totally. So it was like this like power and trust, and like it was all like in bed with each other, and I just like it was so interesting to me. But I was like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Like, okay, great, oil great. A great oil.
Great oil.
Sorry. So again, I'm just like driving around and be like, what am I going to do? And then I found out that there was like this big like desert area in the middle of, I think it was just outside of Midland, or it was like in Midland County. I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was close enough where it was still within this region of the Llano Estacado. It was like an hour outside of Midland. The Sand Hills State Park Preserve or something. Sand Hills something. And it's just sand, you know? So I went there. I remember going there with my camera.
Oh, is that where your camera died?
Oh, no, that was recently.
Okay.
My camera recently face planted and I had to get a new one
Okay.
because I was out shooting in the desert. But no, this was before RIP. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I was just like by myself, just freaking out in the fucking desert. Sorry, you curse on here.
No, you can.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I was freaking out in the desert and I just laid in the sand. By the way, when I went in November, it was like 80 degrees. It was
I would
beautiful.
be concerned if I'm just wandering the desert and there's a woman just lying in the sand.
Yeah. Well, you know, we do what we have to do. But I just was so, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But it was so wacky because I was laying there just like, oh my God, I don't know, this is going to be terrible, this show, oh my God. But I just like, after a while, because there was like slight wind, I was getting like buried by the sand, right? Like that's what happens. And that somehow led me to this, I don't know how it led me here, or I'm trying to figure out I don't remember the order, to be honest, but I found out about the Midland discovery, which was back in 1953, 52. There was an archaeological dig in Midland where they found like these prehistoric remains. The remains were found in the Sand Hills Preserve.
Right.
And I didn't know that when I went there. So I was like, oh my God, there's this weird connection to like where I was, like being buried by sand. And then there was this like body that was like exhumed in the desert. When they first found these remains, like everyone was all excited and be like, oh, these are the earliest remains found in North America, or the oldest remains.
So obviously they were indigenous.
Yes. It was like 10,000 BC.
Wow.
I want to say. Yeah. Old bones.
Really old.
Yes. So they, it was all exciting news. Like, oh, the Midland Man was discovered, blah, blah, blah. Further studies showed that Midland Man was actually a woman. I was like, oh my God, this is interesting. Now here I am being buried in the sand, out alone in the desert, thinking about like burial and like underground spaces and oil. And then there's this woman that was like pulled out of the sand. Okay, there's something here. What also was interesting to me was that when they found out that these remains were actually a woman, it wasn't the Midland woman. No, all of a sudden it was Midland Minnie.
I wonder why they did that.
Because I don't want to just be like patriarchy, but like
patriarchy.
Like, to name something is to like claim something,
Right.
to like claim ownership or like knowing of. There's like a power dynamic in naming, right? Like you name your pet, you name your child. I name you blah, blah, blah. Like there's power
Right.
in the act of naming. And also Minnie.
That was the weirdest choice of a name.
It's not even it's a nickname.
Yeah.
And yes, this was around like Disney was the thing. So she's being named after like
A cartoon.
like that would be the
That, like,
association.
dehumanizes
like that would be the initial association. And it still technically is. Like
Yeah.
Minnie Mouse is a powerful character.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it just like dehumanized and there was like this ownership of, so that for me was enough to be like, okay, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm
No
just
worries.
like jingling the mic. I'm just getting excited. Sorry. That was enough for me to be like, okay, so underground spaces, what it means to be a woman in this part of the country, even other parts of the country, but specifically, power dynamics of religion and oil, and yeah.
But also religion, because I mean, by nature, we always bury our deceased.
Oh, absolutely. So there's always this, we already have it's like these socially or culturally constructed relationships to underground spaces. And so to like exhume, like I understand it was an archaeological dig, but at the end of the day, like it was an exhumed body. Like that's interesting to me, to like remove bones from a place, thinking about the act of burial. And then there was like all of this stuff there.
Oh my God, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but like the saying during Lent where it's like, from dust you came and to dust you shall return, and they do the cross with the ashes.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good shit.
Yeah, you love it.
I love it.
You love it.
I love a good, like, I really like thinking about like American religion. And in this part of the country, it was like very, very like white evangelical American religion.
Yeah, I remember when you told me about the coffee shop where it was like religion.
I spent a lot of time in Midland at Higher Grounds, the coffee shop attached to a church. It was like a mega church, like an evangelical church. And it was the only place in Midland where I could get a matcha. So it's just funny where like the more expensive foods were like connected to like oil or religion or both. And then there was just like, I don't know, like food desert.
Yeah.
And everything's just like fried chicken. It's just a wacky place. And I wish I could do more work there, to be honest, because there's just so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
And that was difficult in itself, just like narrowing it down. But I was like, okay, I have enough here to like think about like Midland Mini as like the core of what I'm thinking about. And with that, like using her as kind of a symbol to think about religion, the economy, underground space, and women in power.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but it just all kind of.
But that
flows
fed
into
the exhibition Sheol.
Yes.
And can you tell us what Sheol means?
So Sheol means the tomb of the dead. And
it's Hebrew, you said?
it's Hebrew. So it's essentially the place where like all of the dead would go. This is like pre-Christian. It's not pre-Christian hell, because hell and heaven they came after Sheol. Sheol was just like a catch-all for like the dead.
Okay.
You're good, you're bad,
kind
you're
of
in
like-
between, you're going to Sheol.
So like in mythology, basically like the underground.
Yes. Yeah. It's the underworld.
Yeah, the underworld.
So Sheol was both like for the souls and whatnot, but also for the bodies. Like it was a physical place that resembled caverns. So it was like, oh my God, Carlsbad Caverns. That like this image, like it all just started to make sense. Where like the aesthetics of like me traveling in the desert, the aesthetics of me like going to Carlsbad Caverns, which is like a fabulous national park. Oh my God. Everyone needs to go there.
Okay.
I've been there twice. I have a sweatshirt. But yeah, those aesthetics came into play when I was making the sculptures. And Sheol as in like the abode of the dead. Sorry, not the tomb of the dead. That also came into play because as I was driving around Midland, being like, oh my God, what am I going to make this work about? Like this place feels like so like hellish to me. And like I'm from Long Island, and like I just, again, this is my personal read. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong or whatever, but my read of this place, I was like, oh my gosh, like the color is washed out, like
There's no greenery.
there's no greenery. Also, did I mention it's like the oil capital? Like this is where things are happening in West Texas. Like this is where most of the oil is being
You even
taken
said
out.
that it smelled like oil everywhere.
Oh, well, yeah, because I would drive down these highways and then you would just see like the pump jacks in the distance, just like doing their thing and just like pumping oil out. And then there were these giant like cylinders where the gas was being pumped out from underground and then burned off. So you would just see like these cranes going, and then
That's almost a post-apocalyptic.
Flames in the distance.
Yeah. It's like the post-apocalypse.
So, and then you just smell gas.
Yeah.
So here I am like, oh my God, I need to make a show. I have to make work for a show for this museum. I don't want to just be like, oh my God, this place is gross. Like that's terrible. And like it's just like a complicated thing to think through. But when I looked at the landscape and I was like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this? It just feels so like post-apocalyptic. Mm-hmm. And so that's where this idea of like Abode of the Dead came in, where it's like this catch-all for like death. Yeah.
Okay, and so the show at the museum was a site-specific installation. You had sculpture, you had sound.
I had sound.
And then you worked with glass, I think, for the first time for that show.
Yes, that was the first time I've ever outsourced work because I'm not a glass artist. I've never blown glass in my life, but I needed these glass chrisms that mimicked like holy oil chrisms because I was thinking about, the chrisms were like abstracted drill bits, like oil drill bits, and I saw all these beautiful oil drill bits at the Petroleum Museum and how they evolved over time, the different kinds that are used for like different types of rock and whatnot. And so I needed to bring that like visual language into the space somehow. And so I was like, I'll cast them in glass and I'll turn them upside down and essentially make this like positive, like aggressive thing into a negative space and turn it into a vessel for the thing that it's drilling for. Yeah. Although the oil in the chrisms mimicked like holy oil, so I used olive oil instead of like I wasn't gonna get like oil like it wasn't necessary because I was trying to draw these comparisons like between like belief and religion and like the economy of oil and how that's just like so enmeshed. So yes, I outsourced glass. They were beautiful.
They were.
So nice. And then the rest of the work, I had sand in the center, and black sand. And then I had 7 sculptures in total. 1 sculpture was hanging from the ceiling. Also, when I had gone to the museum the first time, I saw the space that I was in, and there was this giant like recessed light in the center of the space, and no one had it like responded to the architecture before in that space. I was like, there's something. It feels like either I'm underground because of this light, or this light feels like an alien beam that's like pulling something up or dropping something down. So I wanted to engage with this recessed light somehow. So I wound up just hanging a sculpture from the center that looked like it was either being dropped down or pulled up from the sand underneath. And then the sand, the shape of the sand mimicked the recess of the light. So for me, it suggested some type of like movement.
Almost like an hourglass.
Kind of, yeah. And then I had 6 sculptures. They were around 8 feet tall each, around this like center area that essentially mimicked stalagmites, stalactites. I don't know which one is which. Stalagmites.
You're asking the wrong person. I know nothing about geology or the earth.
So I had those, and those brought in like this aesthetic of like underground. So, yeah. And then I had the sound, which was taken from...
I love the sound again.
The sound is, oddly enough, I'm really into the sound too. And I don't know if it's because I'm still so new at it that I'm not as critical. Like I'm very critical about other things, like sculpture, because I've been sculpting for so long that I understand it enough to be really super critical about it, but also less playful with it.
What I really love about sound work is that sound, music especially, has the power to affect moods in people much easier than maybe like, let's say, a visual might.
Yeah.
So like the second you like listen to a song, you're either happy or you're sad or evoke some sort of emotion almost immediately.
Yeah.
And I think the sound that you used for that installation really brought everything together.
Thank you. Yeah. I also think it's because sound is physical.
Yeah.
Like even when you're hearing, like your ears are vibrating. It's
Yeah,
moving.
you can feel
There's
it in your body.
movement. Yeah. So I think that's where sound comes in for me, where I'm like, if I'm trying to get like really like just
Feel it.
feel this, then I'll use sound.
Yeah.
But the sound was taken from pump jacks that I would like. I just, recorded some pump jacks and abstracted it a bit, threw in some like fun, like weird church bell sounds that you can't really hear, but they're there. And then some sound that was taken from underground. So essentially the sound there was like a narrative component within the sound that took you from above ground with these pump jacks to like below and underneath, and then you came back up. So although the space itself and the way I constructed the installation, it was like a round space. There was a central like object in the center, and then you'd kind of move around the space. The sound gave you like this, like the chronology or the narrative component of the work.
Yeah, no, it was great. I really, really love that show. So I definitely wanted to touch on it. So before that show, you actually had a solo show at Marquee, right? Because that opened before.
Yes, that opened in March.
Did those sculptures that you showed at Marquee, because obviously gallery space is very different from museum space in this context, and obviously galleries want to sell works. So now you have to also think about creating a work that might be sellable. And I know you're literally the opposite of that as an artist, because your work is really more immersive and site specific and more of an experience. So for your first gallery show, how did you really approach that in your artistic practice?
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, like I said, I think I tried to mesh the work I did for Museum of the Southwest with Marquee in that it was all one body of work. I was playing around a lot with materials and like, well, what materials am I going to use? How are these things going to look? What are they going to say? So it felt to me like a lot of the works that I did for Marquee were studies in a way for Texas.
Which, if you see both the show at Marquee and the museum, you can see how those works reinforced some of the sculptures that were in the museum show. Yeah.
Although I wanted to have, like, I already knew the color palette. I think that's something that happens a lot with me. If I have like a show, especially if it's an installation, I see like this little color swatch of like, okay, so this show is.
Did you take them from working from Takashi Murakami?
Maybe.
And being saturated by color palettes?
Or just because I spent a lot of time in Home Depot as a child. And I really loved like the color swatch wall. But like Sheol was like brown, white, black, and like a yellowy gold. Though that was like the color palette that I had. For Marquee, the Marquee show, I wanted to just like have more fun with color. So like I know the color palette, what it's going to be for Texas. I want these works I just wanted to like play a little bit more. And I also wanted to see, can I have as much information in one standalone sculpture, or maybe not as much information, as much impact from one standalone sculpture as I feel that I can do in an installation. And to be fair, it's definitely more of a challenge. Because obviously
you're jamming a lot into this little thing.
Yeah. And like also in that, like on that same, thought, it doesn't have to hold everything.
No.
And that's something that I struggle with. We're like, well, I have to talk about this and this and this work. This one work has to talk about all of my ideas. And that doesn't have to be the case.
How do you even translate that to an audience? It's a lot to take in.
Beats me.
Yeah.
So I just kind of let that go a little bit and just wanted to trust in the material, which was really wacky for me because here I am, right? Like we just talked about how I'm like with earthworms and it's like, you know, about native and this and this. So for me to just be like, I just want to play with materials. Like that's.
And which materials were you using for this?
I was using expandable foam and silicone.
So obviously these have nothing to do with natural
No,
things.
nothing.
Yeah.
Which I also love. Like I love using synthetic materials for like to think about like natural spaces and landscapes, but that's a side note. What was I saying? Crap.
That you're jamming all of this stuff into this one little sculpture.
And I just wanted to play with materials. I wanted to spray some foam around. Oh, I was also using wire mesh. So I was creating the forms out of mesh and tights, like stockings. So I was creating the forms and then like filling them with the foam, leaving them, seeing how the foam would expand, coming back in, maybe spraying some more foam, maybe cutting some foam away, and just like letting go a bit of this like conceptual framework and like getting out of my head, if you will, and just getting into like, okay, I'm just going to respond. I'm going to do a thing. Then it's going to do its thing. And then I'll respond to that, which was a totally different way to work, but it felt really good at the time to be like,
Did you do any drawings or studies before you were making these sculptures?
Ooh.
Or were you kind of just like, let me see what happens here with my hands?
I don't think I did any preliminary sketches for the Marquee Projects show.
Okay.
No, because I just...
So we're really like, this is the material. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, because I had already made a bunch of sculptures in Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Art Institute, that were trash, which was fine because I think it's really important to like get the trash out.
Yeah.
Like you have to make a bunch of crap.
Of course.
Until like something happens. So I was able to like get all of that, like clear the pipes, if you will.
Yeah.
So that when I got back from Texas in December, that the September, October, November were like travel times, and then December I started making the work. I was like, okay, these are the materials I'm going to use. I know what I'm doing, kind of, and we'll just like see where these go. And so I went with like just make as many as you can, and then one of those like one of that series or that set will be like, okay, that's the through line that I want to follow.
Yeah.
And so it's again like these like directions,
these breadcrumbs.
Yeah. And so it was very scary, but I was like, I'm just going to trust, and I'm just going to play with materials, and I'm going to play with color. I'm going to bring back, my interest in like mixing color, or like color theory of like what color next to this color will do this. And it was really nice for a second to think about, like the concept was already there, right? Like thinking back to like pick one word. Like the concept is already going to be embedded in the work. You're already thinking about it. It's there. Now think about things a little bit more formally for a second. So I was able to just like do that, and just to make these like standalone sculptures that were a little bit smaller. They ranged in size from, I want to say like the smallest was like 18 inches? And then the largest was like 5 feet.
Okay.
So they were relatively small.
I mean,
sculptures.
5 feet is substantial.
Yeah, but when you're coming off of making
I know. Yeah, your
sculptures,
other works are huge.
so they're relatively small, and I love that the foam was light. Like I love using materials that I can mostly manage by myself. So I really enjoyed those materials. But yeah, it was different thinking about how do you make work for a gallery space versus how do you make work for a museum institution. And yeah, that was essentially the path that I went, where I was like, let me just think about these formally. It was a really good exercise for me to be like, okay, I'm making sculptures. They can just be sculptures, and that's enough for them to be. And luckily, my gallerists were so like supportive of that. Mark and Tonya, who run Marquee Projects, they were like, yeah, whatever, like just do your thing. And so I was able to just do that. Although I did have a video too.
Oh, I didn't know you had a video in the show.
I did. I had an 8-minute long video.
Oh my God, I hope it's not of you lying in the desert.
No, but it was an 8-minute long video of a cricket that had recently molted that I found in the desert. Like, I'm just walking through the desert. There's nothing around. And I just see this little cricket. Mm-hmm. And it was like white. And my first thought was, oh, what type of cricket is this? We don't have these at home. No, it's the standard, like, whatever. I don't know the names of the crickets. I know worms. I don't know crickets. But it had just molted. That's why it was like this little blonde thing, which means its exoskeleton was still soft. So it was burying itself in the ground to protect itself because it's vulnerable. It's like it had just molted.
Yeah.
So it was going underground for protection. And I was like, oh my God.
This is it.
This is freaking it. So I like crouched on the ground in the sand.
Making this cricket uncomfortable as he's literally naked.
And just filmed it for 8 minutes until I was like, okay, I'm going to leave him be now.
Okay. He's like, thank God this crazy lady's gone.
It got, I don't know. Yeah, but it went all the way into it created this little like cave. Mm-hmm. And then so you see this cricket and like you can hear the sound of the sand.
Yeah.
And I also like that too about like thinking about insects and annelids where there's an attention that's needed, like a slowing of attention. Where like, how often do you hear the sound of a cricket kicking up sand?
Never.
Yeah, but it's so
we don't even hear crickets here at all.
I know, but to just really tune into these like little tiny moments of things is really, and like I loved, like it was an 8-minute video. There was no voiceover. It was just the sound of like the ambient sound, and I just wanted to just watch this video. People didn't. I mean, people stayed, people went. Doesn't matter. But to have like one long shot of a cricket just felt really powerful to me.
You know what's interesting? Because like if you actually look at the sculptures that you had in that show, they almost look like exoskeletons.
Yeah.
And they're just as light as an exoskeleton would be because exoskeletons are just hollow at that point. So it's interesting.
Oh, look at you drawing these connections.
I didn't even know about this video, but now that I'm thinking about it and I know what the sculptures look like, it's interesting.
Yeah, and also the video was called After the Molt. Obviously, makes sense.
Makes sense.
But for me, also as an artist, in this process of like I'm just trusting materials, blah blah blah, like it felt like a very vulnerable space to be.
Yeah.
So the cricket and I just
you bonded.
Had a vibe.
Yeah, you had a vibe.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I guess my next question is, what's next?
What's next?
Any residencies,
Oh my
shows?
God.
What are you thinking about?
Yes. So I have, I think I had mentioned this on the last episode, but I have a residency on Vashon Island in the Puget Sound in Washington this summer. And I have a 2-person exhibition at the Vestibule, which is just outside of Seattle, this summer as well, that I'm working on projects for.
Amazing.
Yes.
Are you still thinking about the same themes, or are you going in a completely different direction?
So that's a themed show.
Okay.
About time, but the After the Molt video is in the show because it obviously is thinking about like time. Everything's about time.
Everything.
I have a worm video in the show, and I'll have some sculptures. So because the topic is so like the theme is so broad, there's like room to like really move through.
Right.
But it's definitely like multimedia, video, sculpture. I guess there's sound in the videos, but there's no like just pure sound works. And then I'm in a group show at Marquee Projects, which is coming up in a month.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. So that show,
when does it open?
I don't know yet. So that information hasn't really been.
Okay.
But if you go on marqueeprojects.com
Yeah.
or on their Instagram, that information will be there shortly.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
So exciting stuff. So that's their like spring show. They just they're opening their 2024 season on Saturday, the 2-person show, and then the following show is a group show that I will
Awesome.
be a sculpture. Yeah, I have to finish a sculpture for that.
Yeah, let's work on that.
Gotta work on that.
Because you always like call me like right before show opens. You're like, I have nothing yet.
Well, things take time.
They do.
So yeah, so that's what I have on the docket for now.
Okay.
I'm also in a show at the Heckscher Art Museum currently.
Currently, yeah.
Yeah, it's a collection show. So one of my works that's in the collection is now on view at the Heckscher Art Museum.
Look at you.
Guess what the work is?
What?
It's a photograph of worms.
You and these worms. They're doing more for you than anything else.
I know. And like anytime I submit, like, people really
Talk
like
about
the
invisible labor over here.
Thanks. People really like the worms. And then I'm presenting at a conference at University of Oregon. Oregon. The right way.
Yeah.
Say Oregon. Sorry.
Oregon Trail.
My apologies, everyone. In April, and at that conference, I'll be presenting essentially the work that I did for the Museum of the Southwest.
Okay.
So my paper is called "Climate Trauma in the Llano Estacado." Good stuff.
Climate conversations are so timely right now, and I
Yeah.
feel like people really need to start paying more attention because we are literally in a crisis.
Yeah. So that feels like a pretty
That's full.
packed-
That's a packed schedule.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
So-
do we have time for some fire round
Yes,
questions?
let's do it.
All
Let's do
right.
it. Don't give me any hard ones.
Well, you have to pick the number, and then whatever it lands on is it's up to the
What is it
universe.
between what?
1 and 10.
Oh God. 6.
6. What is a piece of art that you own that you would never sell, or one that is your favorite?
My favorite and one that I would never part with or sell is a canvas and like pulled thread work by Maggie Avolio. It's like super minimal, and like she has such an eye for like when you're doing something that's super minimal, everything has to be like to the T.
Exactly.
Clean,
Yep.
which is like the opposite of how I work.
Listen, everyone works in different ways.
So yeah, she just did these, like, she used what is that called, like chalk line?
Okay. I don't know. They're just a
I
chalk
don't know,
line?
but basically the way she like pulled the thread through the canvas, it marked the movement of these knots as she was moving them. So there are just like traces of movement on this. It's just it's a beautiful work. So Maggie Avolio's, I think it's untitled, but it's my favorite piece.
Amazing. Love a good woman artist to have in the
she's
collection.
fabulous.
Okay, next question.
3.
3. This one's hard.
Oh,
If you
no.
could talk to anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh my God.
It better not be Midland Minnie.
Yes.
Oh,
that's
God.
my choice. I'm going to say that one just because
Because it relates to your
it
work.
totally relates. And because I would be like, girl, why were you in the desert by yourself? Because she was found alone.
That's very strange.
Yeah, she was found alone. Like, but there were also like other animals near her. So like, what was happening?
What was happening?
Exactly. And also, like, if you could talk to someone dead or alive, I barely talk to people now that are alive. Like, I don't want to talk to anyone.
Okay, fair.
But yeah, I think for the context, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, like, what was she doing here by herself?
Honestly, I would love to talk to her too. Imagine what this human who lived so long ago
Yeah.
could tell you about their life.
Yeah, I also was like, oh, maybe I'll come up with this mythos of like Midland Minnie was actually this like crazy witch or something, and she came in and she like cursed the land.
What if she was? What if she was some sort of like
knows?
religious or ritualistic shaman-esque priestess? Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't know.
I don't know, and that's what I'd want to know.
Okay, that is interesting. Okay, I'll give you that one.
Thank you.
Last question. Take your pick.
How about you pick for me? Don't pick me a hard one because I don't have it in me right now.
Okay. I think this one, because I feel like you read and watch a lot of things. Name a book or film that had profound influence in your life.
We did this one in episode
Okay,
1.
then never mind. Then I will ask you this one instead. What book did you read recently or a while ago that you didn't want to end?
Well, I just read Robert McFarlane's Underland.
Okay, I've never read that one.
Which is a book about subterranean spaces.
Oh, Lord.
And
Girl, get out of the ground.
I know. So he just travels around Europe and goes like through these caverns or goes like through like the catacombs and like just talks so like, I don't know, the way he like thinks about burial and like not only like underground as a place, but like underground as like subversive space and like, yeah, subterranean, unseen, like counterculture. The way he unpacks how certain cultures relate to spaces under our feet is just so like, oh yeah, totally. This makes so much sense.
Oh my God. Do you know where I want to take you?
Where?
I don't know why it just popped into my head and not before. You need to come with me to Poland and go see Wieliczka, which is this underground salt mine.
Oh.
Yeah, near Kraków. And it's basically like, I don't know how many feet underground, but it's so deep.
Oh my God, I would love
And then, of course, it's old school. So you got to like take the staircase down there. And the air there is like so crisp and clean. And it's just, but the crazy part
you
is.
have to take the stairs back up.
No. You take the elevator back up. But the crazy thing is, underground, there's this beautiful lake. But also, because the workers work down there for so long, you know, like digging stuff up, they also made these chapels made entirely out of salt.
No way.
Yeah, and these rooms, and it's an unbelievable experience.
Stop it.
So I have to take you there. I think you'd really love it.
Oh my God, episode 3.
Episode
We're
3.
in Poland.
Are we
Can
gonna
you
make it back?
imagine?
Yeah.
Oh my
I think
God.
you'd really find it interesting.
I would love that.
Yeah, and there's all these like religious, like altars and relics made out of salt. And
Are they like Catholic? What are
yeah,
they?
it's Catholic. Obviously, it's Poland. It's Catholic.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so I feel like that might be
Gotta
really
plan a
interesting for you.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Cool.
that's a wrap for, part 2 of episode. I can't remember at this point, but thank you for joining me.
Of course. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. I hope you're back for
Yeah.
more episodes because I love this.
I'm always, happy to come back and hang out and chat with you.
I wish you lived closer so you could just be my co-host forever.
I know, right? It only takes me like an hour and a half to get here, but no, this is always a joy.
Oh, thank you.
So, yes.
So you'll be back for many more, basically.
Yes, I'm sure.
But thank you for listening and for tuning in, and I'll see you guys at the next episode. Bye.
Bye.